The first thing to share is it's not an easy place to get to. You have to fly into Poland, drive to the Ukraine border, take a 10-hour overnight train ride to Kyiv, and then getting back the same way. But it was an extraordinary trip. I think the first thing to say is that a wise old man once told me that one day of seeing is worth 100 days of reading. And that's why I like to try to visit these places, to meet people in person, look them in the eye, get a feel for what's actually going on the ground. And that was the real purpose of the trip. A secondary purpose of the trip was that it's reasonable to be concerned about accountability and accounting, indeed, in terms of the large amount of support that we and other Western countries are providing to Ukraine. And that was a real focus of my attention on the trip. And I talked to President Zelenskyy directly about that. And then we had a meeting with a number of people in the government and the Defense Department that really got into, I might say, excruciating detail about the software that they're using, working with Deloitte and SAP to track everything coming in, every spare part, every dollar, and of course, working with our people at the State Department and the Pentagon to do the same thing. So I came away very reassured on that point. In terms of the war, there are really two wars going on. One is the war between the armies in the East. And if you want to visualize what's going on, it's as if our East Coast from Maine to Florida and then west to Houston, Texas, were occupied by a foreign power. And it's the entire eastern end of the country of Ukraine, which is a big country, over 40 million people, one of the largest in Europe. And so there's the occupying force. And the war is right now in a kind of stalemate where both sides are dug in along the eastern border. And it's, when I say the eastern border, it's a strip about 100 miles deep into what was otherwise the nation of Ukraine. That is a very rough, a lot of casualties, almost like trench warfare in World War I. Some very serious battles taking place right now in the most important town is called Bakhmut. And there's a lot of work going on there on both sides. So that's that's one of the reasons that in this latest drawdown of materials that the president announced on Friday while we were in Ukraine, as a matter of fact, are fighting vehicles, not tanks, but Bradley fighting vehicles and other equipment helpful to the Ukrainians in this sort of almost hand-to-hand combat to the east. The other war that's going on is Putin's war on civilians. Our last meeting of the day on Friday, as a matter of fact, was with the electric company. They have a nationwide electric company in Ukraine. We went to their headquarters, saw, in fact, where it had been bombed by Putin. And what Putin is doing now is a systematic effort to bring down the entire electric grid in Ukraine, bombing substations mostly, transformers. They take out the transformer, that knocks the grid down. The Ukrainians are being very creative about keeping the grid up and running. A term I heard, it was very interesting. I heard it 4 or 5 times on the day on Friday. They are MacGyvering solutions. And some of you may recall the TV show MacGyver, where this guy could, with a penknife and a paperclip, could build a tank or something. I mean, they are very creative in keeping their system afloat with these constant barrages. The other piece that's so important and is important in terms of the drawdown on Friday is air defense. The air defense is necessary to protect this civilian infrastructure and civilians generally, because Putin is bombing them. this is no surprise, by the way. The bombing, the indiscriminate bombing of civilians is a modus operandi of Vladimir Putin. He did it in Grozny and Chechnya. He did it in Aleppo in Syria. And that's really what they're doing now to try to break the spirit of the Ukrainians. Now, what I learned and observed is that this campaign is having the opposite effect. It is strengthening the resolve of the Ukrainians. It's angering them. And as one of them told me, the people of Ukraine will hate and resist Russia for generations because of this. So if Putin's goal was to somehow subdue Ukraine and bring it into to the Russian Federation, it's having exactly the opposite effect. Finally, and I'll be glad to take any questions, the other thing that was impressive was meeting with our people there in the State Department, the intelligence community, the military attaches, to learn what we're doing, and importantly, what other countries are doing. We're providing a huge amount in terms of dollar value. On the other hand, if you measure it in terms of GDP, we're around between fifth and 10th in the world, and other countries are contributing actually larger shares of their GDP to the defense of Ukraine. Why? Because they recognize, as hopefully we will continue to recognize, that this is really a fight for Western values. It's a fight for democracy. It's a fight for freedom. It's a fight against authoritarianism and dictatorship. And that's why it's so important. And it's important to us. I get letters every now and then from people saying, why are we doing this? Ukraine's far away. It's not our fight. Well, it is our fight, because if we don't fight it now, it will spread and it will become something that we can't avoid being involved in, just as occurred in the late 30s at the beginning of World War II. This is the Sudetenland, 1938, where Hitler could have been stopped, but wasn't, because the West couldn't muster the will to resist. And the result, of course, was the tragedy of World War II. So that's why we're there. I came away impressed by the will of the Ukrainian people and their leadership, by their creativity, by the strength and determination that they're showing. And finally, spending an hour with Volodymyr Zelenskyy was inspiring. He's just as dynamic and impressive in person as he is speaking to a joint session of Congress or speaking to the Ukrainian people. That was, I have to admit, that was a thrilling moment to meet a person I consider one of the great leaders of this century. So that's a little bit of the background on the trip, and I'd be glad to take any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Senator. And once again, if you have a question that you'd like to pose, please drop a question into the function, the chat function, to Zach Holman. First up is Dan Lamparello. Dan, what question do you have for the Senator?
Good morning, Senator. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I caught you on Face the Nation yesterday talking a little bit about this, and was just hoping to follow up on something that Margaret Brennan had asked you about regarding accountability for the funding that we are sending to Ukraine. And I know you had a conversation with Volodymyr Zelenskyy about that. Can you just talk a little bit about the process of making sure that they are accounting for every dollar that is being spent?
Well, as I mentioned, I raised it with him, and basically what I said was, look, if there's a scandal, in fact, I used these words, I said, if there's a scandal involving the misuse of these resources, that will jeopardize any additional resources flowing. He understood that. Then later on, we had a meeting with the Deputy Secretary of Defense and some of their technical people, where we had a PowerPoint demonstrating the software. They're using SAP software, which I see advertised in airports. It's a data maintenance software. And they're also working with Deloitte, the worldwide accounting firm, to work out the process by which, and what we saw, they put up on the screen is spreadsheets with literally every spare part. And the question I asked is, okay, this is all very nice, but is anybody going out and actually physically taking inventory, counting what's there? And the answer is yes. And then we're doing the same thing. We have an inspector general at the Pentagon who's going to be in Ukraine, I think, within a month. And in talking to our people in the military, both in Poland and in Ukraine, we're driving accountability as well. Now, another part of the support we're providing is assisting with the maintenance of their essential services, particularly healthcare workers and teachers and educators. And in that case, our funds are used to reimburse, not to initially pay those salaries, but to reimburse. So a lot of record keeping and a lot of transparency. Now, we're talking about billions of dollars, and I can't sit here and guarantee that in every single case there are no issues, but I was very impressed by the level, number one, of concern and awareness of this issue, and number two, by the steps that they're taking to be sure that all of this support coming not only from us but from across the EU or NATO and the free world is being used properly.
All right, thank you, Dan. Patrick Whittle. What's your question, sir?
Thank you very much. And sorry about the brief pause on my end. Senator King, as you alluded to earlier, there is sort of some questioning of U.S. involvement at home in the Ukraine conflict. How long should we remain there?
Well, I'd hate to set a date and say, 6 months or a year. That's telling Putin, all he's got to do is hold his breath until that date comes. So I believe we should remain there until Putin is out. And that I don't see this as a long 20-year struggle, which we saw in Afghanistan. Here we have a strong government, a strong armed services that are fighting on their own with our help, but they're the people that are dying. They're the people that are on the front lines. And I think the biggest, Putin's main strategy right now is to split us, is to split the US Congress, to undermine support here, to split NATO, to undermine support from the Western countries. That's his last gasp. That's his last chance. He can't win this war now under the circumstances, between the will to fight of the Ukrainian people and the arms and material and support, humanitarian support that we're providing. When I say we, I mean the West. He can't win. So right now, his strategy is to divide us, and that's what we're going to see. And I have no doubt that there are Russian disinformation campaigns right now that are at play here in the United States and across the West that are trying to undermine that support. You probably heard me say this when people, I was on Fox News a couple of weeks ago, and a congresswoman said, well, we should be taking care of our people first. And the interviewer said, does she have a point? And I said, yes, she has a point, and it's wrong. If you Google Sudetenland in 1938 or Rhineland in 1936, you learn that history tells us that dictators can be stopped, but it's a lot easier and cheaper, both in terms of money and supplies and personal and particularly lives, if you do it early at the initial invasion, which is what we're faced with now, rather than turning it into a broader war, which we can't avoid. Bob Gates, former Republican Secretary of Defense, Condoleezza Rice, former Republican Secretary of State, had a powerful op-ed just in the last few days making this very point. History tells us we have to take on this fight and we have to win it.
All right, thanks. Kevin Miller from Maine Public.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, Senator. So following up on Patrick's question, the most recent announcement of $3 billion in aid that includes some pretty substantial firepower as well, like the armored vehicles. Can you talk just about the politics of this again, and kind of what you're hearing from some of the Republican counterparts on the other side? And then kind of as a follow-up, is there more that the U.S. should be doing? Are there weapons that we haven't sent yet that we should be sending to support Ukraine?
Well, one of the meetings, to answer the second part of your question first, one of the meetings we had was with the entire general staff of the Ukrainian military, and it was a detailed presentation of everything they needed, and a lot of which is being supplied by various countries. But we can't, we're unable to meet all of their requests. But the biggest thing they need now is air defense. And that's why an important part of that announcement on Friday was Patriot missile battery, one from the U.S. And I think Germany is stepping up to provide another. And there are several other opportunities for additional Patriot batteries, because all of this bombing, and it's not bombing, by the way, it's missiles and drones. It's not conventional. We think of airplanes flying over and dropping bombs. That's not what's happening. It's missiles and drones that are being launched from outside of Ukraine, from Russia and other from the Black Sea. So air defense is one of the most critical things, and that's why the Patriots are important. And that's, I think, the one area where we can continue to work with them. And I know that's the case, to supply as much air defense capability as we can. The first part of your question is about the politics. And to be honest, I don't know how deep in the Republican Party goes the skepticism. I know that there are members of the far right caucus, which, by the way, I did a calculation. The 20 members who were driving the debate last week in the House represent 3.7% of the membership of the U.S. Congress. That's, if you talk about the tail wagging the dog, it's a very short tail wagging a very big dog. 3.7% of those people. Now, whether I don't think that the mainstream of the Republican Party in the House is sharing these sentiments, but it is concerning, and I think we just have to continue to remind people how important it is, and that this is not some faraway conflict that doesn't involve us. That's the same attitude that was in this country in the late 1930s, and because of the lack of response to Hitler in the West in between 1936 and 1939, we ended up with World War II and 55 million people killed. So this is a place where we can stop this. And I should say, Maya Angelou said, if somebody tells you who they are, you should believe them. And Putin has made very clear that his overall goal is to reestablish the Soviet Union. He said that he thinks the breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. And so I have no doubt that if he had been able to sweep into Kyiv and polish off the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian resistance within a matter of weeks or months, we would now be seeing fake provocations to move into the Baltics, to Poland, to Hungary, to Moldova. This is his goal. And the question is, are we going to stop him here and now, or are we going to allow this not so gradual aggression by a dictator to continue? So that's why this is so important. It's a case I'm going to continue to make. My response to my Republican colleagues who are making these noises is read a little history, because history tells us now's the time to take a stand.
Thank you. Phil Hirschhorn. Phil, what's your question, sir?
Well, the truth is Kevin Miller asked my question, so I'll just ad-lib something different. Can you hear me? Because my screen just froze.
You're
Ken,
are
you in your car, Phil? Usually you're in your car when we have these conversations.
No, thank you, Senator. I made it to a dining room table this morning and see you in living color. My camera's off. I don't think anyone really wants to see me, though I did put on a blazer out of respect. I was just going to say, Kevin and the question before him kind of covered it with the GOP politics and the other questions that you just answered. So let me just sort of ask this one a little bit out of left field. You keep invoking Hitler. And I'm not as good a student of history as you are, but I don't think arming Britain and our allies stopped Hitler. That wasn't enough until we sent troops. Now, from the beginning, you've been against that. I don't even think President Biden was for sending troops to stop the convoy at the beginning of this war. But is that still off the table, more than just sending equipment and weapons? Is the possibility of NATO troops or U.S. troops part of a NATO force in anyone's imagination at this point to stop Putin from his broader goals that you've described?
I don't think so, and I don't think it's necessary. The Ukrainian army has proven itself extremely capable. As I say, it's a large country, 40 million people. They've now got, I don't know the exact number, but well over 500,000 people, men and women under arms. So I don't think that's in anybody's contemplation. I don't think it's necessary. But to go back to Hitler, the point is he could have been stopped in the Rhineland and in Sudetenland without a great deal of without American troops or very much in the way of French and British troops, but they didn't do it. And I can go into the historical reasons why they didn't. I just am in the middle of a big, long book called The Collapse of the Third Republic about France's failure to confront Hitler when he violated the Versailles Treaty in 1936 by remilitarizing the Rhineland. But anyway, the point is now's the time to stop to avoid the necessity of troops and the kind of worldwide conflict that we've lived through and certainly want to avoid at all costs.
All right, that was a good riff there, Phil. David Guilford from News Center. How can we help you, sir?
Good morning, Senator. And as we talk about trying to avoid the necessity for troops, as we continue to send more lethal aid and U.S. weaponry is responsible for the latest strike that killed dozens of Russian personnel, how concerned are you with escalation between our two countries directly and Putin's view of that? Well,
Putin is going to call everything an escalation. I mean, that's good. That's just what he's going to do. We, and when I say we, the administration, the Pentagon, are being very careful about escalation, about providing weapons that don't strike outside of Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are under, they're under some constraint on that front. On the other hand, they can't. Their problem. Here's the dilemma: virtually all of these attacks on their critical infrastructure are coming from outside of Ukraine. They're being launched from bases in Russia, from ships in the Black Sea, and that's one of the dilemmas: is how do the Ukrainians defend against that if they're unable to strike at the source of these attacks? On the other hand, escalation is a serious issue, and that's why the administration is being very careful about what's being supplied are not weapons, long-range missiles, for example, that would reach into Russia, and that's on everybody's mind. And as these decisions are being made about these drawdowns, it's a concern. As I say, Putin is going to say anything is an escalation. I saw this morning where he said the Bradley fighting vehicles were escalation. They're simply treaded vehicles that will enable the Ukrainians to more effectively fight this trench warfare on their ground, in their country. Nobody's wanting to invade Russia or has any intention of invading Russia. So we can't, it's a careful calibration where we don't want to escalate the conflict outside of Ukraine. But on the other hand, we have to provide the Ukrainians with the wherewithal to defend their own country.
All right, thank you, Senator. I do want to give voice on behalf of a couple of people who are on the line. and some people who were reaching out to me over the weekend. And it came up in a conversation with Margaret Brennan in the green room yesterday. It was not lost on many people that you wore a sweatshirt with Joshua Chamberlain on it when you encountered President Zelenskyy. Can you speak about the significance of that, why you did it, and how did he receive it?
Well, in thinking about, I keep saying Zelenskyy. I have a friend named Zelenskyy, President Zelenskyy. You think about courage and determination and grit and visionary leadership. And as I was thinking about the trip, all those qualities remind me of Chamberlain. And I just thought it would be fun to have Chamberlain with me in that meeting. And that's who was on my shirt. There's a little bit of roll at the beginning where you can see me explaining to the president who Joshua Chamberlain was, and he got it. So it was just, I just felt it was a gesture that I could make out of respect for him, and to connect what he's doing to what Joshua Chamberlain did for this country throughout his career. The greatest citizen Maine ever produced. And it felt good to me to have him with me in that room.
All right, very good. And again, if anybody has any questions for Senator King, you can chat with Zach Holman through the Zoom function.
By the way, it's amazing that you can go online and Google Joshua Chamberlain sweatshirt, and lo and behold, I found a little company somewhere that made them, and that's what you saw.
Excellent. One quick sidebar, and I do appreciate having been a former local reporter. I do appreciate the hustle. So Dan from WGME also wants to talk about today's significance in a different realm. Dan, are you still on the line to talk about the ice storm 25 years later?
I am, yes. And Senator, I had the pleasure of rewatching your State of the State from that year, and it was a great speech. First of all, not sure
that was I've never watched that speech, but wasn't that the one where I said Maine is being put to the test? Was being put to the test?
Yes.
Yep, I remember.
Yeah, that was a great speech. But on the side note, the 25-year anniversary, just to get your reaction this many years later, looking back on what that moment was like in the history of our state.
Well, it was probably the greatest natural disaster we've encountered, and I think it was the largest call-up of the National Guard. So there was something like 700,000 people who lost power, and what I didn't realize or really had focused upon until that weekend, after the ice storm, power was out and it got cold, was that it takes electricity to fire your furnace. And so we had a lot of people who not only didn't have electricity, but didn't have heat. And it was an extraordinary experience. When you're elected governor, you never know what's going to be thrown your way. Just as Janet Mills didn't know she was going to have to deal with a pandemic, I certainly didn't think I was going to have to deal with something like the ice storm. So there's no manual, there's no book on how to do it. And I'm proud. The best part of it, I mean, it was a terrible it was terrible in many, many ways, but the best part was the way it brought Maine together. It was just amazing the way people were helping out their neighbors, were communicating with one another, looking out for one another. That was for me the sort of outstanding memory, was the positive spirit that people undertook this very difficult program. Just one example, we had linemen coming from other states who were repairing our electrical system, and they said it went at home when the power's out and we have to go out on the street, people come out and yell at us, and in Maine they brought us coffee and cookies, and that was sort of a symbolic of the community spirit of the people of Maine.
Coffee and cookies, but wasn't there also a story about donuts as well?
Oh, well, yeah. Matthew's prompting me. One of my memories
I just have a sweet tooth on a Monday morning.
Yeah, okay. Well, I took my son Ben, who was then about eight or 9 years old, and we decided to visit all not all, but the shelters that were set up around the state. There were shelters where people could go to keep warm. And so I stopped at the Dunkin' Donuts. We stopped at the Dunkin' Donuts in Brunswick, and I got up to the counter and said, I would like all of them, please. Everything you got. And a lady behind me in line leaned over and said, can I just have one chocolate cruller? So except for that chocolate cruller, Ben and I took all the donuts and distributed them at the shelters. But I think that lady did get her chocolate cruller.
All right, thanks. I think everybody has gotten their questions asked. We certainly covered the landscape, including a look into the past at the ice storm. Senator King, any parting words before we sign you out and you head to your next meeting?
Yeah, to go back to the questions about the politics of this, as I think I mentioned, Vladimir Putin's last gasp is to divide us, and we can't let him do that. We can't fall for it, either here or across the alliance that's confronting this terrible threat. And so I'm hoping that we can maintain support, understanding that it's got to be accounted for. It's got to be looked on as precious taxpayer resources, not to be wasted, but protecting democracy, freedom, and confronting authoritarianism, as President Zelenskyy said when he spoke to Congress, isn't charity. It's an investment. And I think it's an important investment that we have to continue to maintain our commitment to. So thank you all for joining us this morning. And I got to get back to work on some closer to home issues here. Thanks again. See you later.
Thank you, Senator. And we'll have a transcript and video sent to everybody very shortly. Have a good day, Senator.